What do you think? Should we have Elwanda Smith back to do a whole service? Oh my. Now, I believe her son is part of the Justin Bieber longtime keyboard player for Justin Bieber. Justin, sometimes we're on a first name basis, apparently. He often posts things about, is his name Jaden? It's Jaden Smith, and how much, I mean, they are close. So I don't know why I decided to tell you all that, but from Kansas City to that. Fred, I asked Fred a couple times about Justin Bieber, and he didn't know much about him. Okay, I think we'll get started. Dorothy and Richard, did I know you before Bethel College Mennonite Church days? I don't think so. You knew my parents. Yeah, so I was where I served as pastor before this, Bethel College Mennonite Church. They were very active, and Richard especially was on the board. Where are you, Richard? On the church council. And I learned to know him and his kind of brilliant organizational mind, and attention to details and systems. He liked good systems that ran for longevity. And then I came here, and I started looking through the archives and saw his name and learned that he's also has a history of being a community activist and advocacy work and agitator, and just love that we're all just these multi-dimensional people. So I've treasured my connection with you for many years now and many years to come. So thank you. Dorothy, come on up and present, and then we'll have a time for questions and answers. Will you give answers? You'll try? And then we're going to end our time with a song. So stick around.
What Ruth did not say was, in my capacity as Western District Conference minister, I ordained her. So, imprinted. It has been a joy. June of 1974, Richard and I and our 14-month-old daughter, Melissa, came to Rosedale on a new assignment that Richard was half-time as Sharing Community Research Associate. Nobody knew what that meant. And I was half-time alternative school English teacher. My first career in life was an English teacher on Bethel College education. We had no place to live, so John and Roseanne Stoneking, he was the pastor of the Rosedale United Methodist Church, and this parsonage is up the street. They said, well, you can just live with us until we find an apartment for you. So the first 3 weeks of our life in Rosedale meant that a playpen was in John's study in the house, because that's where Melissa took her naps and spent the night. And the pull-out couch in the living room was where Richard and that was where we stayed when we were part of the family. Their daughters, Anne and Kristen, were delightful, I suppose they probably were 7 and 8-year-old, that type of age. And they carried Melissa around and read books to her and sang songs. And Melissa never missed us when we went and looked for a place. That was 50 years ago. And being back here this weekend feels like we're back home. And then we stayed for 10 years, and we're part of this congregation. I heeded the call of this congregation and others to go back to seminary to finish an MDiv degree that I had started at the Mennonite Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana, and had been counseled not to continue. Because why in 74 would a woman get an MDiv? And especially in the Mennonite church. There's nothing you can do. So I said, well, I guess I'll go back to English teaching, which led me to wonderful people like Dale Graham at Turner High School and other wonderful connections. But that call to be in church work came back, and so I resigned my teaching position, an English department chair position, and went to St. Paul School of Theology and finished an MDiv there. And by the way, all the classes are team taught at that seminary. So very different than a solo professor. Then to make a long story short, I have spent the next 30 years in church life as pastor, as a seminary administrator, and as a conference minister. And in 2016, I retired from that public ministry and wondered what I'd do with my life. And I thought maybe reflecting on my life might be something to do, so I started writing and published a first book called The Pastor Wears a Skirt, which is the sort of story of gender and ministry in the Mennonite church. It's short stories. They're funny, they're good. And then that was published in 2018, and then I felt I needed to tell the story more corporately of women in ministry in the Mennonite church, and so I tapped 12 other writers, and Lois Barrett, who was a retired professor from the seminary in Elkhart, and I co-edited a book that's called Proclaiming the Good News. So pastor wears a skirt, proclaiming the good news. And then I thought and heard about here and now the church by the playground. So, but I'm done writing for a while, but I'd like to share the story, a story with you of this wonderful community. And the photo on the cover, by the way, is from Ruth. I was commissioned in 2021 by the Rainbow Mennonite Church Council to research and write a comprehensive history of the sharing community in Rosedale, commonly called SCR. A comprehensive history sounds absolutely boring. So I wondered if going through the files, reading tons of committee minutes, and scouring the newsletters would be all that interesting. Believe me, this is an intriguing story of the SCR. How in the world did three congregations forge a collaboration that built a playground, incorporated hundreds of volunteers, and employed over a dozen pastors who remained faithful to their calling to preach, teach, heal, and lead? How did three urban congregations from three different Protestant denominations cooperate to be a community of faith in the Rosedale neighborhood of Kansas City, Kansas? The collection of annual reports and minutes and photos were stored in several closets at Rainbow Mennonite Church. Boxes of archival material began the trek from 1444 Southwest Boulevard in Kansas City, Kansas, to our duplex in North Newton, Kansas, in summer and winter of 2021. The nearly 40 boxes made their way into our kitchen, then upstairs to Richard's office. And he sorted and organized the materials, yes, by different years on different steps and different months on different steps, and created an outline of the past of the subjects, took out staples, never used metal staples in archives, and paper clips. He took them out, put all the contents into the new archival folders and boxes. And by the way, We returned all those boxes yesterday, day before. While Richard organized, I retrieved folder after folder, read the contents, took notes, and wrote the first drafts of a future imagined book. The boxes then were moved downstairs into our dining room in archival order. With more space, I began to write in earnest. I have footnoted all my work using the new SCR system designed by Richard. As they said this morning, the History and Archive Committee received monthly essays and reports, met monthly by Zoom, offered feedback, critique, and encouragement. By Christmas of 2022, it took some effort to host a family meal of 9 surrounded by boxes. However, a book of SCR chapters was emerging. Section 1 is our early history of the 3 congregations in SCR. Chapter 1, labeled Prelude, briefly summarizes the 3 churches' early history, programs, and pastors, plus it describes the Rosedale community. Geography shapes ministry. Where you live forever marks you. And the geography of East Kansas marked the 3 congregations. A brief history of the Methodist Church in Lower Rosedale at 1444 Southwest Boulevard, next to the Whitmore School, is described. This 1927 photo and the following pictures are some of the 150 photos in the book. The 3 churches were nestled in the hills and valleys of Rosedale, cut in half by the I-35 interstate highway. Upper Rosedale was dominated already by the University of Kansas Medical Center. And Upper Rosedale then was a racially diverse neighborhood with a large African American population and its churches. And the Elwanda Richardson family lived there and served. There were at least 4 African American churches. Lower Rosedale was crisscrossed by railroad tracks, which followed Turkey Creek. Indigenous nations, specifically Pawnee and Kaw, were dislocated in the 1850s from this area. By 1877, there was a city named Rosedale, with its forest of trees and hazel brush amidst a profusion of wild roses. This beautiful place became an industrial center where railroad rails were manufactured by the new immigrants, Welsh workers who loved music, worked hard, and built a large limestone building, the First Methodist Episcopal Church of Rosedale, Kansas, and dedicated this building in 1908. 2 blocks away from the Methodist Church is a more modest church building of the Rosedale Christian Church, which was founded in 1910. These 2 Protestant denominations were neighborhood congregations with mostly white, multi-generational, and mostly varied socioeconomic groups who built homes and worked in schools. The Rosedale community had businesses, banks to grocery stores, movie theater to saltwater baths, schools to dentist offices. These 2 ordinary congregations grew in the 20th century into stable congregations. The newest member of the emerging tri-church collaboration was the Kansas City Mennonite Church, founded in 1957 with Stan Bone as pastor. Its small brick building was in Upper Rosedale, across the street from the KU Med Center. Nearly half of the charter members were doctors or nurses or men who worked at the Med Center, and kids, wherever Ken Gertz is, grew up in that church. Mennonites outgrew their building and the selective service, the 1W workers, that ethos stayed with the congregation. But they outgrew the building and were invited to have their worship in this sanctuary in Lower Rosedale, invited to rent space from the Rosedale United Methodist Church. Thanks to the leadership of Clyde Coryell and Gary Schrag, and before that, Maurice Culver had been active United Methodist pastor in this community. So geography was a common link, a common ground for ministry and service. After researching and writing and thinking seriously about Rosedale, I reflected on the cultural context of these three churches. This photo shows Pastor Stan Bone in the back with a tie, and the baseball team that was denied City League participation because it was racially integrated. This story of the sharing community in Rosedale catches hold in the late 1960s during the Vietnam War, when civil rights was agitating the entire country, when urban blight and urban flight were gripping many cities, and when religious leaders begged their parishioners of all stripes to pay attention to poverty, racism, economic stratification, women's roles, and to the welfare of the city. Congregations took seriously their mission when shaped by their culture and time. What is the context? What are the issues? Who is Jesus calling to preach the good news, heal the sick, and welcome the stranger? Chapter 2 is a very long chapter, over 60 pages, covering the years 1969 to 2013. And yes, 2013 is when I stopped the history project, not because of Ruth, but because of editorial ethics of not trying to tell the history when somebody is currently in leadership. It recounts the way three distinct congregations, the Methodist, the Disciple, the Mennonite, maintained their theological beliefs and structures while collaborating with each other about urban ministry. In fact, 1969 is the pivotal year as the Mennonite congregation moved its worship to the Mennonite Methodist building and dedicated their own building in Upper Rosedale on Rainbow Boulevard for community ministries. And the sharing community in Rosedale was born. I found it absolutely astonishing that three congregations from three different Christian Protestant denominations, all with strong theology, who built institutions of colleges and seminaries and hospitals and service organizations, decided to serve together in mission to their local community. They did not try to convert each other in doctrine. In fact, the Christian Disciples of Christ Church explicitly has this kind of phrase in their history: no creed at all. Just follow Jesus and love each other as sisters and brothers. It's kind of my wording. The organization of SCR was called a federation. It was not a merger. It was not a coalition. It meant maintaining separate membership in the three different denominations, but service together. It also meant a new model of leadership. By 1973, the Rosedale team ministry was the structure of congregational and community ministry. The team included the three pastors. There's John Stoneking, Methodist pastor. That's Don Anderson, who was the Christian Disciples of Christ, and Ken Rupp, who was for 2 years the Mennonite pastors. 1973 just happened. So those three pastors. Then Don Bakley, who was executive secretary, office of Crosslines. And then there were the community workers, and there's Karen Gehring, Hosteller now, Margot Hoffman, Galen Cordes, and Alan Deachman, all of them through Crosslines. That was the staff meeting that met. So you had a team, not just about one church, but together. You had separate staff meetings of just the buildings, but this was the team ministry. During the 60s, this ecumenical project was also part of the thinking of all Protestant denominations. And Stan Ingersoll, who is a former member of SCR, wrote a separate essay in the appendix describing ecumenism. Section 2 is about urban ministry and community service, the early part. Chapter 3 tells the stories of early collaboration and joint projects in the 1960s by these three churches and other denominations. So this was not just those three. In fact, I think sometimes I counted up to 30 different congregations, not 30 denominations, but many, including Catholic, were part of some of the ecumenical work around here. Ecumenical cooperation modeled effective community ministry for SCR. Loyalty Mission, an early version of Rosedale Mission to cross lines, it was clear that urban ministry required a call to Christians to cooperate. That was not easy, nor popular. Some people left because they didn't want to deal with other denominations. Most stayed. Denominations often competed for members. And sometimes our bosses in conference and denominational structures wanted to see how much have you grown was a tally of whether you were a good pastor or not. But in Kansas City, Kansas, there was cooperation. Stanbone writes in 61, one of the basic things about Christian witness is to be there, to be where the decisions are made, the problems are, and where the need is. We find instead a great exodus of Protestant church members from the problem areas. We now find something else happening when suburbs and inner city fail to relate and one abandons the other. The people in the inner city are not only left in a place, they are also being cemented into a social class. An early visible change in the church's neighborhood was a mobile home, staffed by a volunteer, Steve Ratzlaff from Henderson, Nebraska, that was dedicated to the youth of Rosedale. The Boys Club was often referred to as the other side, since it was just west from Mill Street from the big Methodist church. Chapter 4 tells the story of structures and programs. A significant early decision of the three churches was a joint church school for all ages. So the Mennonites met here at 9 o'clock for their worship. At 10 o'clock, everybody went to church school together. Sunday school, there were no Methodist classes and whatever. And then all the children also worked. So it was a joint church school. And then at 11 o'clock, the Methodists had their service here, and the Christian had their service in their building in the early years until there was some change. Separate worship, joint church school. The past 50-year experience of the elective program for adults and the steady organization of the Sunday school hour for children, that is nursery through high school, bound the people of SCR together in a learning environment. It was the secret sauce of SCR. Friends were singing, praying, learning, and struggling with different life questions together. In every way, the routine of discussions about spirituality was a critical component of lifelong learning. How was God acting in people's lives? Critics and advocates of various religious practices met the everyday experiences of ordinary people who were part of SCR. The classes for all ages and stages of life through the elective church school model formed and informed Christian commitment. And I did include the earliest model from 1970 and 71 so you can understand it. While the church building, that is this building, remains to this day, the Whitmore School, built in 1899, was torn down in December of 1973, and there's a lot of information about why. The closing of the school was a sure sign of community loss, but the literal destruction of the building inflicted a painful wound to Rosedalians. The Mennonite congregation had moved into the Methodist building in 1969, and this ecumenical ministry retained distinct denominational identities while cooperating as the SCR. However, the Mennonites, who owned a building in Upper Rosedale, had joined the Methodists in this area for some of the church activities, and the nearby disciples, with concern about the empty school lot, grew in Lower Rosedale. John Stone King, who was the pastor of the Rosedale United Methodist Church at the time, advocated with others for a playground. So when Whitmore School was torn down, leaving a barren lot with one set of monkey bars, the Methodists and the Mennonites equally bought the land of the school and the parking lots. The neighborhood groups around the church allocated money, and the Whitmore Playground was built and dedicated June 19, 1977. The death of the school and the birth of the playground were important markers for Rosedale. Even more impressive was the cooperation of neighborhood, city, and churches to accomplish an artistic, practical, and inspiring project for all ages. Countless individuals and volunteers all had a hand and a prayer in celebrating a permanent symbol of healing and hope. A backboard identified the playground to the neighborhood and the curious passerby. Bernita Boytz, SCR longtime mover and shaker, who retired from the Park Committee in 2010, said that the playground was the most important thing we've done. It has the most long-lasting impact on the community. Voluntary service, a term sometimes embedded in Peace Church language, was a hallmark of men and women who dedicated 1 to 2 years of their lives by moving to a new community and offering service. A new Kansas City Mennonite Voluntary Service Unit began in 1976. Imported volunteers gave time and talent to nonprofit organizations dedicated to community service over the next 4 decades. Freedom Schools, a significant SCR and Rainbow Mennonite Church initiative, started in 2007 and continues each summer with values of literacy, identity, and healthy living for community children ages kindergarten through 8th grade. The Mennonites dedicated their church building at 3950 Rainbow Boulevard to mission and named it Common Ground, and it has a chapter all its own. Chapter 5 tells the story from 1969 to 1993 when the building was torn down. Was sold, not torn down. Still stands. From a traditional sanctuary to an urban ministry center in Upper Rosedale marked its transformation. All 3 SCR buildings were open for community ministries from early morning to late at night. The SCR story is a biography of a church community. Chapter 6 especially pays attention to the Rosedale neighborhood. The government structures of Kansas City, Kansas heard the voices through 2 neighborhood groups, the Whitmore Neighborhood Group, that's the one to the north, and 1418 homes to the south, which surrounded 1444, the Methodist Church building and Whitmore Playground, where the star is. The Rosedale Train Watchers and Waiters was a loosely organized community group. Its helpful brochure listed phone numbers of the Frisco and Katy Railroad officials for complaints, and the phones started ringing. Misdemeanor complaints were filed. The Rosedale community was alerted to do more than slam on brakes, yell, and pound the steering wheel when delayed by stopped trains crossing the streets. SCR staff, and particularly Richard, learned quickly at the first court case that he was outflanked when 4 attorneys for the railroads appeared in the courtroom. They claimed that the complaint denied legal commerce, and so the judge dismissed the case. But Whitmore Neighborhood Corporation and the 1418 Homes Community Development Groups hosted a potluck under the Frisco and Katy, near the Frisco and Katy railroad tracks and under I-35, just along Southwest Boulevard. T-shirts with the logo, a graphic of a large foot with a prominent toe, and "Give the trains a kick in the caboose," now portrayed the biblical David and Goliath conflict as a contemporary reality. Probably the Rosedale Train Watchers and Waiters was one of the best examples of community activism, long-suffering agitation, and solutions that worked themselves out with lawful protest and a good dose of humor, which dampened anger and promoted goodwill. A brief conclusion by myself and Pastor Ruth and the book. A comment. Church life requires long hours, patience, and a simplified theology. Not simple, but simplified. What I mean is that any congregation worth its salt takes countless meetings. Meetings are the grit which forms community, refines personal beliefs, and dares each other to do something new with no guarantee of success. The SCR was a living organism that was shaped by discussion, resources, and years of just showing up for church. The church by the playground was committed to the neighborhood and served there with its feet firmly planted on the ground. The story of the sharing community in Rosedale is an example of an ecumenical experiment that had an impact on thousands of lives, and it lives on. Thanks be to God. Two important additions to this book include the Appendix A, the essay by Stan Ingersoll about ecumenism, and Appendix B, which is already on paper in 1969, a proposal for something like the sharing community in Rosedale. And after we're through here, I'll be downstairs, and if you purchase the book, I'd be happy to sign a book for you. Can entertain questions for a few minutes, and then I have a closing comment. Yeah, they already told me they had something else. This is not anything to do with it. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you both. Thank you for coming.
Okay, let's see a show of hands. Who all would like to ask a question? Just kind of get a sense of the room here.
Half of these people heard this yesterday, so it's not a big surprise.
Well, partly because we're live streaming, I know Joel Smith Gearing is maybe listening or will be. He lives in Washington, D.C., and was one of the Mennonite voluntary service workers, then turned staff, and he really was instrumental in getting Freedom School started here in this location. He asked the question, well, what's the status of SCR today? And I know maybe Karen would have an answer. I'm going to try to give an answer. Hopefully he's listening, and some of you may have wondered the same. So we, among all the people to thank, the sharing community in Rosedale, the last board meeting, Andy Taves, you're here. He was on that board. What year did we commission this project? It would have been like 3.5 years ago. We held our last meeting as an SCR board, and we had some leftover funds that we decided to gift towards this book project. So it was about $10,000, a little more, given to an archive fund in order to be able to hire a writer and a researcher. Would you have anything to add to that, Andy? Is that about right? Okay. Other people on that board at that time was Karen Siebert, Gerald Banning, David Bluford, myself, I think, oh, and Mark Wiebe. Some of you may remember him. So then the SCR board decided to, they communicated with the church council that they decided to go dormant. That's kind of or mothball, sometimes is what it's called. So the 501's 3C, is now inactive, but it hasn't gone away completely. So should the council, it would be a church council decision to reinstate it. It would be, there would be some paperwork involved, but we could do it. And this is not this is the second time it's been mothballed. Is that correct? At least? So you never know. We resurrected it once in order to house the Freedom School project under. So you never know when it'll be needed or resurrected again. So hopefully that answers Joel's question. There is no functioning SCR board at the moment. Karen, would you want to add anything? Okay. Okay. Any questions? You all hungry? Okay, Karen.
Karen Gearing Hostetler, when I made my comments during the sharing time, I did not say too much about Richard and Dorothy. And I just want to say that as our committee worked with them, I will have to say that the term overwhelmed was a big word that we used often. If you imagine 35 boxes that were basically unsorted, and to think about, I sometimes say that they really did an amazing job of bringing creation and creativity out of chaos. They kind of led us along the way. We certainly had some pretty major challenges along the way that we had to deal with as a committee. And we survived, and we have a beautiful project, a beautiful result. I think at least the committee thinks it is. But anyhow, 50 years of friendship with Richard and Dorothy. We were at Bethel together, and of course then when they first came here. And you were figuring that it's exactly 50 years now that you moved here when we talked about that yesterday.
In June, yeah.
Yeah. So many thanks again to Dorothy and to Richard, both, thank you, for our renewed friendship and that we all survived together.
Richard, can you come forward? Because you haven't been on the video yet. We have a song we're going to sing, and we want you, is this close? You can wave to the camera so everyone can see you. In honor of both of their work, especially Richard's specific work with the train watchers and waiters, we commissioned an artist, a builder in Goshen, Indiana, Verlin Miller, to create a miniature train model of this neighborhood footprint to show just what a public health concern it was when trains blocked the access. Somebody died because an ambulance couldn't get through, right? So this was a major public health concern. So it's downstairs next to the fellowship hall closets, mm-hmm. And we're going to display it somewhere in the church permanently with a plaque of Thanksgiving for your own kind of handprint on this place. So, well. It's 10 till 12. Well, I'm hungry. Are you all hungry? I think we're going to end with a song that we wrote in Thanksgiving. It's specifically for Dorothy. You can both sit down if you want. Actually, we'll all stand. So where is it? Where is the copy of the song? It's right here. Rosie, can somebody pass out the copies?
Dorothy, when you were talking yesterday and gave your presentation, I was thinking, you know, a million years ago when I was at Bethel and I wrote my senior science seminar on reinterpreting American history and Mennonite pacifistic perspective, I thought, man, I had hit the Holy Grail, you know. All my professors loved it, all of Bethel loved it, and then I thought, I'm going to send it out to other historians to get their perspective on this. This will be really good. And they crucified it. But what are you doing reinterpreting American history, not using the presidents? And then I got to thinking, you know, what kind of monumental task you guys had in this committee of writing history with so much brain power and so much commitment and passion for this. And Ruth asked me to participate in this, sorry. You know, we do these amazing things in our church, and then I get to do some silly song, and with having not participated in anything. But Ruth kind of took a stab at it, and then I kind of worked at it a little bit, and this goes out to you. And it's a lot easier to rhyme things with Dorothy than it is to Richard. So Richard, we're not leaving you out, but right? Okay. What's that? Yes, I'll sing the stanzas, and then you sing the refrain. Great is your faithfulness, Dorothy from Kansas. There is no other who compares with thee. You gave your all for 3 years and counting. Grateful we've been and forever will be. Everybody. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning persistence was key. 1 year went by and 2 more years did follow. Great was your faithfulness, thank you, Dorothy. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, boxes and papers kept piling high. What once was a table for dining and sharing became a mountain that we chose to climb. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning persistence was key. 1 year went by and 2 more years did follow. Great was your faithfulness, and you don't. Pardon for cursing this project at times. Meetings were often so very long. Strength we prayed for each day, each tomorrow. And with God's help, you finished strong. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning persistence was key. 1 year went by and 2 more years did follow. Great was your faithfulness, thank you, Dorothy. Daily we're still writing history at Rainbow. This place forever will be in our heart. Thanks be to Dorothy and all her helpers. 50+ years is just a good start. Great is thy faithfulness.
Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, persistence was key. 1 year went by, and 2 more years did follow. Great was your faithfulness. Thank you, Dorothy.
All right, let's head downstairs. Richard and Dorothy, I'm hoping you can be first through the potluck line. So we'll try to make that happen, unless we go down and people are already eating. That could be too. So let's all are welcome to stay for the potluck.